if you're somebody who's saying, hey, I really want to get my blood sugars in a better spot, I don't need to wait for January 1st. I can do it now. Pumps have come a really long way, which is amazing. But I think what's interesting is having been on the pod now for, again, on and off for about a year, and you've heard the ons, you've heard the offs. I've had a lot of issues with sites, but at the same time, when the device works, man, is it amazing. At the end of the day, it's not the system, it's the user and what the user chooses to do with the system. The key is making sure that you are the one paying attention and you are the one leading the ship. Because otherwise, if you don't pay attention, doesn't matter what you're on. You could be on the most automatic thing ever, and it's not going to matter. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years, and I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. And before anything else, I just wanted to say I hope you and your family and your friends or whoever you may have celebrated with had an amazing Thanksgiving with amazing food and, most importantly, amazing blood sugars. Because let's be real, this is a diabetes podcast. We're going to make everything related to our blood sugars one way, down to the weather, which, by the way, is absolutely freezing. And that can and will have an impact on your blood sugars. More on that in just a minute. But I feel like this would be a good opportunity to just not wrap up a few different things, but once upon a time, I know I did an episode about my experience on the DIY loop so far. I feel like giving a definitive answer between why I went on the Omnipod in the first place and if the Omnipod for me is the pump that I'm going to use moving forward, I think that would be interesting to give some insight on and put a kind of a bow on it, because I talked about it, I kind of teased it, and now that it's been about a year, not in total time using the pod, but a year since the first pod I put on, might be a good time to talk about that. And then also just a couple little pitfalls that people may experience and you may experience around the holiday time when it comes to blood sugars, but not just the typical holiday parties and snacks and other fun things, but a couple random things that you may run into as well. So call this a smorgasbord, if you will. I really just wanted to say smorgas, nailed it. But anyways, first things first, the loop. So I'm currently looping. I'm currently enjoying the loop. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm somebody, I mean, you can see loop, yay. So I'm somebody that has been on an insulin pump for 22 years, over 22 years, which is kind of wild now that I really put that in perspective. But the other thing is, yes, we've seen the pumps go a really long way. I remember having the pump back in the day, black and white screen. Everything was manually calculated. I had to figure out the doses myself. There was no bolus wizard. Like, pumps have come a really long way, which is amazing. But I think what's interesting is having been on the pod now for, again, on and off for about a year, and you've heard the ons, you've heard the offs. I've had a lot of issues with sites, but at the same time, when the device works, man, is it amazing. And then you throw the loop on there and it's a whole different ball of wax. I feel like to put a bow on it. I remember back in the summer, I did, an episode on the loop. I also did a post about, hey, what is my preference? Do I prefer the Tandem? Do I prefer the Omnipod? And again, every single person is going to be different. Your situation is going to be different. What you're using it for is going to be different. Your age, your activity level, etc. But my ultimate thing right now, and I don't want to be that person that's like, well, there's no way really to decide. I genuinely feel like when it comes to the device itself, I actually, and this would be like, a 48 kind of thing, I actually prefer the pod, which is really insane for me to say as someone who was on a tubed pump for decades, literal decades. And here's the biggest things why I like the pod more. And of course, I'll put my caveat on that in a second. The pod, to me, it's now small enough where it doesn't really interfere with anything, which I absolutely love. I love the fact that it's on my body. And I also love the fact, and maybe, I'm weird for thinking about it like this, but when you're used to having something attached to you for so long, and every time I leave the house, I'm thinking, okay, is my pump with me? You're rolling over in bed. Oh, is my pump there? Am I going to have a problem with it? It's just this extra thing. And again, the pump's not heavy, right? It weighs maybe a few ounces, but the pod is tiny. Like, I forget I'm wearing the pod half the time, which is amazing. And you put it out somewhere where it's out of the way, even better. So just that alone is really interesting. And the other nice thing, at least for now, because I am looping, I'm controlling everything from my phone. And while I know that, okay, You can control the tandem from your phone. You're still attached to the thing. There's still a screen there. And yes, it's nice that there's a backup option. You want to dose from the pump itself. You can. I can't do that on the pod, but it feels really nice to just have a phone and just have a pod and go about my life. Now, what I will also say is you've heard of times where I've flip-flopped back and forth. Well, do I want the pod? Do I want the tandem? What do I trust more? And we went on a trip and I, took the pod. We went on a different trip and I took the tandem. So here's kind of what went into that. So the first time we went on our anniversary trip back in the spring, and I ended up opting for the pump. And I chose the pump just because I was not yet comfortable enough with the loop. I had just started the loop maybe a month before, and I had a decent idea of how it was working, but I wasn't totally sure. And I wanted to go in with a situation where I knew what I was going to be doing. I knew what was going to be going on. Kind of one of those tried and true type things. We did a later on trip in the summer, and I went the pod the whole way, and it was incredible. I loved it. I mean, we were in the water, we were hiking, we were super active. It stayed on. It was amazing. I was absolutely over the moon with how the pod acted. And then needless to say, since then, we've had a couple, weekends away here and there, and I have flip-flopped. I've had times where I've been on the pod and then the pod has failed me. I've had times where I've been on the pump and the pump has failed me. And most recently I did a trip and I was on the pod and I loved it. And here's the thing, at least for me, and I know my body's different than your body and everybody's body's a little bit different as people with diabetes. But what I have noticed is with the pod, there's pretty much two big hangups that I have, two massive hangups, and then everything else is not gravy, but everything else is reasonable. Hangup number one is when the site doesn't work. And that would go for any pump. It wouldn't matter if it was tandem. It wouldn't matter if it was the pod. But obviously when the site doesn't work, when I know I put in a site, and this is again, whether it's tandem, whatever it is, and it hurts and it stings, I know that the site is not going to be good for me. And again, maybe it's different for you. Maybe it stings and you're like, oof, that one sucked, but you know it's going to work. For me, I know that means it's drawn blood. And every time I yank the site out, there's blood gushing out like it's a geyser. It's a delightful time. But what I know is if I left it in, it wasn't going to absorb well. My number's going to run higher. I'm not going to feel good, and it's not going to be a good situation. The issue with that is when it happens with the pod, and I don't know if Omnipod, if you're listening to this, please consider this as a possibility for the future. But once that happens with the pod, if I know the pod's not working, I just lost that insulin. And I've had people say, oh, well, you can draw the insulin out. If someone wants to teach me, whether it's Omnipod themselves, if it's someone listening to this, if you want to teach me how to draw the insulin out of a pod successfully and predictably, that would be incredible. Because I can count on one hand the number of times I've gotten more than probably 10 units out of a pod. And that has been what's driven me crazy. Because if I have 2 or 3 bad pods in a row, I go to put it in, it stings, it's crazy, the blood's already showing up. Well, if that's happening, I know it's not going to work. Well, there goes 200 units. Do it again. There's 200 units. You do it. And so suddenly you've wasted an entire bottle of insulin over nothing. And insulin's not exactly, an expensive thing. It's not water, right? It's insulin. It's the 6th most expensive liquid on the planet. So we're not out here trying to waste any insulin. So in that case, that drives me bananas, absolutely bananas. And so what I will say on the flip side, when the pod works, when it goes in as, little like, oh, I feel that, or, oh, I don't feel it really at all, and it goes in, the pod is incredible. I absolutely love it. I thought, oh, is it going to get in the way of everything? Is it going to be terrible because I can't move it the way I can with the tandem? No, it really doesn't. I mean, the worst I've felt is I go on like a leg press machine or something, and I'm laying down and I feel it if it's in my lower back, digging into my back a little bit. And even then, it's not a huge deal. It's nothing crazy. It's as big a deal as you ultimately make it into. And so I love that aspect. Now on the flip side with the tandem, right? Tandem, you have a bad site, you rip out the infusion set, you put in another site, you're not losing any of the insulin. That to me is the major difference. If you could take that aspect of the tandem and put it into the pod, I am probably on a pod for a very long time. However, I also absolutely adore the tandem. I think the tandem for Control IQ, which I personally don't use, but for Control IQ algorithms on the market, I think it's the absolute best that exists on the market commercially. The DIY loop, not quite same. I like the DIY loop a lot because I like the fact, and again, why I like it here is it gives you that cushion. What I think is really important and something that I think is extra interesting is not too long ago, we were away for a weekend. We went to Nashville. We got this massive milkshake, absolutely massive, incredible milkshake. I did the math. It was about 200 grams of carbs, and that's not an exaggeration. Disclaimer, I did not drink the entire thing. I had probably just over half of it, and Amelia shared it with me. Here's the thing. My blood sugar's pristine, and it wasn't just because of the loop, right? I nailed the dosing. I knew what to do for the dosing. I've figured out at this point what needs to happen for the fat and the protein aspect of things and when to include it and how to include it. But what's really nice about it, and this is my favorite part about it, for the fat and the protein especially. So you have a meal like that, right? I had eaten dinner before. Then you have this milkshake. There's between dinner and the milkshake, you're looking at over 100 grams of protein. You're looking at close to 100 grams of fat. Plus, you've got a ton of carbs in the picture. That has the potential to make your blood sugar go nuts overnight. And meanwhile, I spent the entire night around 80 to 90. And you might think, well, how is that possible? Besides the fact that the carb counting went well, the beauty is with this loop. And again, the Control IQ does it to a different extent. Same with Omnipod 5. But what's beautiful about the loop is you can say to it, hey, there's some fat and protein that's going to be kicking in. I'm going to start it out. I'm going to, guide it effectively, and then it's going to take care of the rest of it for me. Now, in this case, I was pretty aggressive. I knew what needed to happen, how much I needed to take, etc., for my body in this situation. But on the flip side, if you're not totally sure, if you're like, hey, I know there's a lot of fat, I got to do something, I'm really tired, I'm going to do this and then go to bed, and then wake up in a few hours and double check on it. Well, in a case like that, it's going to help protect that. And there have been times where I haven't been perfect on my dosing, or I've, forgotten to get up or whatever it might be. And I'm peaking at 170, 180, when without the loop, I'm going up to 280, 300 because it knows, okay, there's some fat coming in. I've got to do something. And it has your back with that, which is absolutely incredible. And yes, I would say it's more aggressive than the commercially available algorithms, which is why I like it, because I'd much rather be at 170, 180 for, 4 or 5 hours than at 280, 290, having to come all the way down. And again, of course, the loop is not perfect. There's no absolute perfect system out there, right? You could say the iLet's perfect. You don't have to carb count, but at the same time, you still have to have an idea of what you're doing, because it still requires you to know less carbs than normal carbs or greater than normal carbs. And even then, the precision's a lot less. There's going to be a little more variability, but a little bit less work by the actual person using the device. So there's always a trade-off. There's nothing that's absolutely perfect. I was in a trial for the iLet about 10 years ago when it was still could potentially become the, bihormonal system with glucagon and insulin. And it was absolutely incredible. I absolutely loved it. What I'll also say is control-wise, again, it wasn't quite as tight as you can get it with some of these other systems. And I've seen people on the loop, like the DIY loop, who are averaging, they have a lousy week and they're averaging 115. So it can be done and it can be incredible. But I've also seen that with Tandem as well, right? It's all about, at the end of the day, it's not the system, it's the user and what the user chooses to do with the system. This is just my personal experience. I personally love the loop and I love the pod. And the other thing I like about the pod, and this might be a smaller, a littler thing, but it's something to still consider. When you're packing for a trip, it's a lot less stuff than with Tandem. I'm not saying, that would deter me from using Tandem, but in retrospect, right? You think about, you're traveling, you're going to be gone. You're going to be gone, let's say, let's pretend for a week, right? And you have to do 2 or 3 site changes. So you bring, 6 to 8 site change stuff just in case, because you want to have double what you need, right? That's a lot of space versus with the pod, it's so tiny. You bring 15 of them and you're not even going to notice. It's going to be less space than that, 6 to 8 for the Tandem. So just something random, fun fact. But I would say for me, definitively, as of today, I would pick the pod by the tiniest of margins over the Tandem for my situation. Now, again, I think those two are 2 of the best on the market. I think Medtronic works with their algorithm for certain people and certain populations. Same with the iLet. And of course, MDI, as you may have heard from a couple episodes ago, has its place as well. And some people love it, swear by it. I've seen people have amazing control with whatever system that they choose to use. The key is making sure that you are the one paying attention and you are the one leading the ship. Because otherwise, if you don't pay attention, it doesn't matter what you're on. You could be on the most automatic thing ever and it's not going. You could be on the iLet, right? It's not going to matter. You're going to have okay control, but it could still be better as long as you're paying attention. So with that, part 1 of this. Second thing is couple holiday things that people don't necessarily realize or think about this time of year, because it does get busy. It's easy to get swept up in what's going on. And a lot of people will backburner their blood sugars. So one thing to notice, and again, this is something that you don't really pay attention to it until it finally hits you one day, is your activity level, given the time of year, is likely to drop unless you are very on top of it. And what I mean by that is, think about it, right? During the summer, it's nice outside. You're going for walks. If you've got kids, you're running around with the kids. You're going for a run outside, or maybe you're biking, whatever. There's lots of ability to be outside. In the winter, it gets dark at 5 p.m. It might even get dark earlier than that, right? So you're getting out of work and then you're coming home and it's already dark outside. It's already cold outside. It might be in the 20s, the 10s. Maybe it's in the 40s if you're fortunate. But at that point, you don't want to be outside. It's freezing. So then you're at home. And unless you're making a concerted effort to be active, which you may be, but if you're not, it's really easy to get swept up into not being as active as your body is used to being. And if your body is used to a certain amount of activity every single day and you don't do that, suddenly you're going to get more insulin resistant. Your blood sugar is going to run higher. Prime example of this, and I'll use my own life as an experience, right? I think it was maybe 4 or 5 days ago. I had a day where I had a bunch of meetings. I have a standing desk because I don't like sitting down for long periods of time, but I'm standing at my desk. I'm not really moving. I had to drive a bunch back and forth to different appointments. I was at 1,800 steps by 4 p.m. and my body at minimum needs about 7,500, 8,000. I usually get more, but that's what I like to get as my baseline, right? As my minimum. I'm at a quarter of what I'm used to. My blood sugar was just sitting 180, 190 for seemingly no reason. So I realized, okay, probably because I haven't really moved today. I start moving. I go walk. I want to say I walked maybe like 3,000 steps, 3,500 steps. Suddenly my blood sugar goes right back to where it should be just because I hadn't moved. And so that's how important movement is. I'm not telling you, go out there and, got to run a marathon, got to go run 5 miles. No, but there's a baseline level of activity that your body is expecting as a person living with diabetes or without, but as a person living with diabetes, it's going to directly impact your blood sugar. So this time of year, it's super easy, right? You go to work. Oh, you have to go to a work function afterwards. You have to go to a holiday party or a kid's party or whatever. Well, suddenly that time goes away and you're not paying as much attention. Your blood sugar is running high. It might have nothing to do. You might be blaming it on the snacks, but it may have nothing to do with the snacks. It may be, oh my goodness, I thought I dosed perfect at dinner and it was fine. Yeah, but you just weren't straight up active. And that is a very viable thing. And so in that case, if you are not going to be as active, you are going to have to adjust your medication with your care team. There's no nice way to put that. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It's just straight up. If you are not as active, you're going to get insulin resistant and you have to blast through the resistance, preferably through physical activity in that case. And again, nothing crazy, but if it's, hey, let me pace around my, living room, that works. I've done it. I'm living proof where I've paced around enough and it actually does work and get you to where you want to go. So keep that part in mind as well. So that would be one thing. And then another thing, just straight up cold weather. Of course, I just mentioned the activity side, but cold weather in general is going to make a difference with your blood sugar. And I won't sit here and harp on the fact that it will make you more insulin resistant. And some people find the opposite. But the majority of people that I've seen in my experience living with diabetes and working with people with diabetes, which our team has served, my goodness, over 3,500 people at this point, which is people tend to drift up when it's cold out. Number one, the reason I just mentioned from a sedentary perspective, from the lack of activity. But another thing is just straight up, when it's cold outside, your body may view that as stress. And because your body views that as stress, your body increases its cortisol, which increases insulin resistance, which then says, okay, now your blood sugar is going to run higher, whether you want it to or not. And you have to blast through that as well. Now, on the flip side, what I will say is if it's cold outside and you're doing an outdoor activity like snowshoeing or snowboarding or, skiing or something like that, even sledding, because your body is working harder to keep your internal body temperature warm, it is now working a little bit harder. Your blood sugar can also drop faster. So that's a huge caveat that I really want to make sure that you know, because that can and will happen. And it is no joke. It is absolutely no joke. I live in Florida, so I don't get to see that quite to the same extent as others, but if you live somewhere where it's cold and you're doing an outdoor activity, you will plummet if you are not careful. And again, this doesn't go for every single person. There are some people that plummet just when it gets cold outside. There's some people that plummet when they're active and it's cold out. There's some people that plummet. It has nothing to do with the weather, right? But ultimately, the trend that I tend to see for people living with diabetes is plummeting blood sugars if they're active when it's cold out. But when they're not necessarily active, they're going to be more insulin resistant just by virtue of the extra stress on their body, which again, function of many other things, but something to be aware of that's not really talked about. And I feel like it's just not a well-known thing in the diabetes world, and that's okay. That's why I'm ultimately here, and that's why my team and I are here to help you have amazing blood sugars while eating amazing food, doing the things you love with the people you love, and not feeling restricted by your diabetes. So with that, I hope you got a little bit of insight from this between the pod and then the weather and learning what to do to keep your numbers a little bit sharper this holiday season. But with that, if you're listening and you're loving the pod, you're getting some great value from it, please drop us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are listening. And if you're somebody who's saying, hey, I really want to get my blood sugars in a better spot, I don't need to wait for January 1st. I can do it now. I can start now, get momentum so I can be running into the new year with awesome blood sugars. And you're serious about it, my team and I are here to help. We're all registered dietitians. We all live with type 1 ourselves, and we all have exercise backgrounds. We might even take your insurance. So if that's you, holler at me on TikTok, Instagram, at manofzl, MANOFTZL. And with that, I will catch you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.